So what you're looking at here is a DIY scanner that you can create with a cardboard box and you use your iPhone with it. If you don't have a scanner, like a proper dedicated scanner, then this can at least help you get a similar quality and consistency of a scanner just using your iPhone. It's not going to be as good, but it's better than just holding the phone with your hand. So in order to make this, you're going to need a cardboard box about this big. This is 12 inches by 9 inches tall by 9 inches wide. It needs to be big enough to hold your artwork on a letter size sheet at least. So it should be at least, let's just say 9 by 12 or around there. And then the other important measurement is the height. If your box is too short and you have your camera down close, it won't be able to focus properly and you won't get a sharp image. So that 9 inches I have found is a good minimum distance from the camera lens to the bottom of the box. So other than the box, you'll need some tracing paper, and this acts as a diffuser so that when light is coming in, maybe I can just quickly show you here. When light is coming in, it creates a nice soft box effect versus something more harsh, and it won't give you like hard shadows and hot spots and stuff like that. So I got my tracing paper off of a roll of tracing paper, but you can also find it in sheets or pads of tracing paper. You'll also need some clear tape. This is just some old cello tape that I have lying around. And then you'll need a ruler. I recommend something like this, and you'll need a box cutter or an X-Acto knife to cut your box. And for cutting the tracing paper, I recommend scissors. It just does a cleaner job of it. And then either a pencil or a marker or both for making marks, knowing where to cut, and that kind of thing. So unfortunately, I only had one of these boxes, so I won't be able to show you me doing this all over again, but I'm pretty sure you'll kind of figure things out just by me kind of showing you the steps that I took step by step without actually doing the things. So the first thing we want to do is figure out where the camera is going to go when it's resting on the lid. So I just have my phone app open here in photo mode, and I'm kind of holding it at the height of the box because that's where the lid will be, and it'll be sitting on top of the lid, and just kind of trying to figure out where it will see that entire sheet. And it just so happens that at 9 inches high, it can view pretty much all edges of this 9.5 by 11 sheet of paper. I believe my lens is here. This is my 1x lens, like the normal lens, not the one that kind of is more fisheye. And so that's basically centered to the center of the box. So the camera itself, or the phone itself, I should say, will sit a little bit to the side. And then the next step is just to mark that out on your lid. So put the lid on there. Of course, you haven't cut your hole out yet, so just remember that the center line of your box is about here, and then you place your camera. For some reason, I put my mark here kind of more in the center, but when I just showed you, I actually confirmed that it's a little bit more off to the side. So you can mark wherever you think that phone's going to go, trace a line, the shape of your phone basically, on the box lid, and then that gives you a sense of where you're going to put your camera when you do your scanning. And then also it gives you a sense of where you need to cut your camera hole. So what I did is I cut out a business card sized hole here using my box cutter, being very careful to cut away from my body at all times. And I just wanted to make sure that the hole allowed my normal lens to show through and see what's inside the box. Once you have your phone outline drawn on the box and your camera hole, it's time to start cutting out your windows. So you can start with the lid, and what I've done here is basically made as big of a window as possible on the opposite end of the box that's not the camera side, so that I want as big of a window as possible without making the lid too flimsy. And actually, while we're talking about that, it's the same thing on the whole box. Like, I want as big of windows on each side as possible without losing the structural integrity of the box. And so that's what I've done there. So for this one, I just used my ruler and created a border using the width of the ruler all the way around, like this. From this window's edge here, I just measured another ruler width this way, and that ruler width is 1.25 inches if you want a specific measurement. And by creating this border around, the rectangle that's resultant in the middle there is what I ended up cutting out with my box cutter. And then once I've done that, it's time to cut the windows in the rest of the box. So we'll start with the long sides. And the way I did those to start was I just drew a line using the bottom edge of that top lid, and I used that as my guide on both sides, and that created the top part of the window. And then did the same thing as before. I took my ruler and drew a line, a ruler width in from the edges, and then the resulting rectangle that I had, I just cut out with my X-Acto knife, and I did that on both sides. So once you've done the sides, you can move on to making your windows for the ends. Now for the ends on this kind of box, you have a flap that goes up, and so you're not going to be able to cut a window taller than the flap. So I just use that as my guide. I just use the top of the flap, and just as usual, I'll use my ruler width to measure in a smaller rectangle, and then use my box cutter, always cutting away from my hand and never directly toward my body, to cut out that rectangle. Once you've got all your holes cut, it's time to cut out your tracing paper to make your diffusers. I made my panels of tracing paper about 1/2 inch beyond the size of the window. So basically, whatever the size of your rectangle window is, then you add 1 inch to your tracing paper. So that window here is 8.5 by 4.5 inches. So that means my tracing paper for those panels, and there will be 2 of them because there's 2 sides, needs to be, we said 8.5, so add 1 inch, 9.5. And then we said 4.5, so it'll be 5.5. And it doesn't have to be super tidy, just roughly that size. And you'll want to cut 2 of those, so maybe while you're at it, you can just measure out 5.5 inches on this side here, and then measure out that. And so now I have side 1 and side 2. And then for the ends on this box, I'm going to need to go out 1 inch from 6 inches by 2.5 inches. So that will be 7 inches this way and 3.5 this way. Double checked in terms of measurement. You can start cutting them out with scissors. And you can be as tidy with your cuts as you want. I'm getting a little bit loose here. Oh, and don't forget your lid on the top. So the window on my top here was 3.5 by 6.5. So of course, then you want to just put your tracing paper over top the windows so that they become diffusers. So I put the tracing paper on the outside, and I started just by taping the corners down, and then anywhere where I thought there might be a light leak or if it was curling up too much, I added a little bit of extra tape. Now on the lid, I did actually put the tracing paper on the inside of the lid here. If you prefer to have a cleaner look and you can do a really tidy job of taping, you can definitely put these on the inside. That's just a matter of personal preference and how much of a hurry you find yourself in while you're making this. And so that gets you to this stage where you have a functioning light box, which is actually your DIY iPhone or smartphone scanner. So I have a couple of pieces of sample art to scan here. I made them smaller just because I was working smaller, but this will work for any amount of coverage. So I'm going to put my sample art in here. We'll cover it, and the principle is very simple. You just make sure that lid is on flat as possible. You get your phone on there. You want to get this as well lit as possible, and so what I'm going to do is take this and use this bright available light to take as bright of a image as possible. You certainly don't need this much light, but this is what I'm going to do just to get it as good as possible. Now, just for today, I'm going to actually scan another sheet here. These two pieces of art actually overlap one another to create a two-color image. And so I'll get this one going in this box as well. Okay, so now of course we want to get these scans looking as professional as possible. So here's what we're going to do. And I should say that my goal here is to get this to be as high contrast and black and white of an image as possible. I don't want any shadows or any of this like paper texture that you can see here. So just using the editing features in my Photos app, the first thing I want to do is just desaturate the image, and that means take out all the color. So I'm here on saturation, and I'm going to pull that all the way down to 0. The next thing I want to do is remove the vignette. So there's just this inevitable kind of shadowy frame around the edge. That's called the vignette. If I go to the last setting here in the iPhone app at least, or the Photos app on the iPhone, it's called vignette, and you just pull that back until those disappear. So that looks good for now. I'm now going to adjust the contrast itself. So you can go to the contrast, and I want to increase that. What that does is it makes the whites really white and the blacks really black. For now, I'm just going to go all the way. So the next thing to do here is to go to shadows and basically bump up those shadows. If you increase that amount, it brings those shadows up higher. Highlights, everything basically boost as high as you can without it like kind of making the image do the opposite of what you want. Gonna make the brightness brighter, and I find that increasing the brightness there really made the big difference. And so I'm just playing around with these different settings until I get exactly the settings that I want. I think that looks good, and now I'm gonna do the same for the other part. So that's probably as good as I'll get. At this point, my scans are complete, and they are as crisp and black and white as I can possibly get them. Now, what I didn't show you in today's video is how I made those two scans turn into a two-color piece of artwork like this. And for this, I just use Procreate Pocket. You could also just use regular Procreate. You can use Photoshop. And this is a really fun way of making two-color kind of vintage styled art using handmade color separations. I also have a class called Slo-fi Illustrations on Skillshare that shows a much more elaborate process like this, and if you don't have a scanner for that class, now you do. And that's it, your own DIY scanner. It's simple, it costs next to nothing, and it gives you surprisingly clean results. Thank you very much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please let me know in the comments, and consider subscribing to know when more videos like this come out.